Today we're going to be looking at the landscape analysis as it relates to transportation and programs, starting out looking at both the national level, scaling down to the Milwaukee level as well. So starting off at that national level, we'll look at public school transportation statistics. So you'll see that nationally, over half of all K-12 students are transported at public expense, often taking the school bus, and that the average cost per pupil transported is around $1,152. Now, when you look at the map on the right, you can see that that national average does include a variation of statewide averages, with some states being in the low 200s and some going well over $1,000 on average. When you see Wisconsin, you can see that it fell in about $558 per pupil in the 2017-18 school year, um, which was sort of right in the middle of that section. It's worth noting that transportation costs tend to be higher in communities that have larger student populations and a higher proportion of low-income students who typically rely a little more heavily on the school transportation that is provided. Now, when we look at Milwaukee, we know that more than half of all MPS students were using MPS transportation in school year 23-24, and that overall MPS transports like above 50,000 students per school day, which does include private school students in Milwaukee, and that average cost is very similar to the national average, around $1,100. What we'd also like to point out is that, given although there is a steep cost to student transportation, which for the next budget year was the proposed allocation was around $60 million. That does make up a relatively small portion of the overall budget. This coming year would come in around 4%. Let's looking at the history of some of the challenges that have been faced in the transportation world. One that many people are familiar with, at least at a high level, is school bus driver shortages. This is something that ramped up pretty significantly following the COVID-19 pandemic. So when there were the lockdowns and many schools stopped teaching in person, many school bus drivers lost their jobs, and there was a real challenge to recover that staff when schools reopened. Some of those challenges are ongoing, and some of these charts can help you understand why. So if you look at the chart on the top right, you'll see that school bus drivers actually lost their weekly wages over the past 4 or 5 years. Their weekly wages went down while the average workers went up. And hourly wage changes for those who work hourly, they are also growing at a much slower level than the average. When when interviewing school leaders as well, it is commonly noted, virtually all school leaders have noted that bus driver shortages have made their school operations increasingly challenging. This was noted in the Hop Skip Drive's State of School Transportation Survey, which is pretty extensive. So if you click that link in the bottom right corner on the PDF that is accompanying this recording, you'll be able to look at more data from that report. Now, looking at some of the bus driver shortage challenges that are specific to Milwaukee. Milwaukee was also impacted by these bus driver shortages during the COVID-19 pandemic. Many of you may remember that. But whether it was canceled bus routes or late arrivals or just general lack of reliability due to the shortages, we know that there was a lot of frustration and challenges that were created, coming back from the COVID-19 pandemic and returning to in-person learning. We also know that, unreliable school bus transportation and school transportation does have a correlation with absenteeism, which is a problem nationwide in public schools and that many districts are still working to address. It is worth noting, though, and sort of to dispel some of the myth, the shortage as of this most recent school year has significantly abated and is nowhere near as prevalent due to more successful recruitment and adaptation efforts with altering routes and sort of changing the functionality through the three-tiered system to make sure that students are getting to school on time. And when we look at national transportation trends and sort of what's happening in terms of who is using school buses and at what frequency, we'll see that since the pandemic, there has been a very strong surge in private vehicle use. So if you look at the table on the right, you can see that the x-axis across the bottom is broken out by different age students, and the y-axis going vertical is the percentage of those students using which type of transportation to get to school. You'll see by the faint line and the more bold line that private vehicle transportation has gone up, school bus transportation has gone down, um, biking or transportation by foot has gone up for the older students, and public transit remains relatively low and has even declined for the majority of the age groups. We know that these changes in trends and transportation is creating new challenges for a lot of schools and districts where these facilities and campuses were not necessarily designed for car-centric infrastructure and logistics in terms of pickup and drop-off, and some of the challenges that come from idling cars around the building. When we dig into this statistic a little bit further, you'll see some interesting context within there, which is that there are differences in those uh, trends based on, which families you are looking at. So families that have higher education levels had a much higher spike in private vehicle use, while families without a parent that has a four-year degree actually had an increase in school bus use and a decline in private vehicle use. Uh, so we know that there are, sort of different inequities with as time passes, and lower income families, as I mentioned earlier, tend to rely more heavily on the public school transportation. So this is important to consider when looking at any transportation policies and sort of who is using those services and what the potential impacts are going to be. We know that districts are doing a lot to try to address some of the challenges that are coming from school bus driver shortages or just the sort of growing challenges around student transportation in the modern world. So picked a couple of examples here um, of districts that are trying something new to address some of the challenges. Uh, One that stands out is Colorado Springs, who is using an AI powered tool um, that is helping them to optimize their bus routes, given that they had a significant driver shortage. I believe about half of what they had expected, helping them sort of create new routes, use potentially smaller vehicles, which has actually, at least in the immediate short term, produced results in terms of more on-time arrivals and actually saving them significant amounts of money that can then be put back into the classroom. More locally, when we look at Chicago public schools, there is a new carpooling initiative called the Piggyback Network, which was started by CPS parents, but basically is an application that allows parents to coordinate and help one another by picking up their students along their route, aligning with other families to see who is headed in the same direction, and to create sort of a network of shared rides, and sort of billing itself as trying to strengthen community along the way. So this is an interesting example given its proximity to Milwaukee as well as the choice atmosphere that does exist within CPS as well, knowing that there are many students who are traveling quite a ways to get across the city. We do see changes in Milwaukee also. So, MPS recently did approve an earlier start time. So going back to that tiered system, we know that recently the start time was shifted to 7:15 a.m. Again, trying to make sure that students are arriving on time and that bus drivers are having the time and capacity and being set up for success in terms of hitting all their routes through each tier and helping address some of those absenteeism issues. It's worth noting that the earliest bus pickup times were held the same, although the start times did move earlier. More recently, MPS launched an application that allows parents to track school bus locations. One of the major concerns that came up during the bus driver shortages with the pandemic, not just in Milwaukee, but all over, was about parents not knowing, sort of where their student was getting to school, where they were after school on their way home, just given the sort of long delays in bus driver, bus arrival times and getting students to and from school. So next we'll be shifting to look more at the specialty schools and specialty programs, knowing that that is sort of the other component of this month's meeting, looking at sort of how the specialty programs and sort of atmosphere and that has become so defining for MPS came to be. So a short history lesson, following several landmark federal cases, starting out with Brown versus Board of Education in the 50s, the Civil Rights Act in the 60s, and um, Swan versus Charlotte Mecklenburg in the 70s, schools across the U.S. were required and being pushed to uh, take steps and immediate action to desegregate and integrate their public schools. As schools considered different strategies on how to do this, one popular strategy was the creation of magnet programs or specialty schools, terms that are used interchangeably. But these were, schools that were sort of promoting that voluntary desegregation, trying to attract those white or high income students and families to remain with the district and to attend schools that had, predominantly served students of color or low income students previously. So this definitely hit in Milwaukee. So in 1976, a federal court required MPS to desegregate, and MPS responded by introducing magnet schools or specialty schools, rolling out mostly at the high school level, but really trying to promote integration and provided a really robust transportation program to go along with that. Over a third of their schools were involved with that transportation program in an attempt to really set that magnet school program and sort of strategy up for success. Now, when we look down the road, we know that nationally speaking, there is still a great deal of segregation that exists within public schools. We have 1 in 6 students who are attending schools where 90% of the student body uh, share their racial background. So that would be a school that maybe is 90% Black, or 90% Hispanic or white. Um, and then in Milwaukee, knowing that that segregation certainly exists at high levels here as well. Now, when we dig into some of those specialty programs that are most relevant to Milwaukee, we can look at the trends and see, kind of where they've been and where they're headed. So starting off with Montessori, one that MPS is certainly known for, given that it operates the most public Montessori schools of any U.S. district. You can see that it has been steadily climbing since the 1970s when those initial uh, public Montessori schools were introduced, climbing to nearly 500 and around 500 today. And it's worth noting that there are many more private Montessori schools that are operating within the U.S. So about 90% of the Montessori schools in the United States are private. Um, but there are certainly a growing number of public Montessori schools as well. Next, we'll look at dual language and immersion programs. So this is certainly a specialty school type that has been surging. Even looking back just about 15 years. So in 2010, there were around 1,000 dual language and immersion programs, and that has increased in the next decade by around 250% to over 3,600 programs. So a lot of these programs are Spanish focused, um, which certainly sort of aligns with some of the immigration trends that are being seen. There's also a strong amount of Chinese language programs as well. And then just something that I know we discussed during last month's enrollment focused meeting, but it's certainly a growing percentage of students who are classified as English learners. So, the overall proportion of the student population in the U.S. has grown to 10.5% and higher, and that it is continuing to increase, which is likely to project an increase in the amount of bilingual and dual language programs supporting those students. So when we look at international baccalaureate programs, we see that there's also been significant growth there as well. So the chart on the right shows you over the past decade or so the growth by state in terms of IB programs, seeing that uh, about 45 of the 50 states, actually exactly 45 of the 50 states experienced growth in the IB with their existing IB programs. Um, and that 6 states actually more than doubled their number of programs that they had. So, even looking at a much broader scale, given the nature of the International Baccalaureate program and its global scale, globally, even just over the last 5 years or so, there's been an increase of almost 35% across the 160 countries where those programs exist. And noting that MPS recently expanded its IB offerings, even just in school year 23-24. Uh, so that growth is certainly there to see. Um, and the final specialty program sort of that we'll look at today is career and technical education programs. And so this is one that is talked about at an increasingly frequent level, and good reason for that. So in 2019, there's approximately 85% of all high school graduates had taken at least one CTE course. Um, and you'll see some of the sort of popular areas there. And you can also just note the great deal of funding that is coming for those programs on average across states, increasing by almost $200 million over the last 10 years or so. Um, what's interesting and maybe worth further discussion is just noting the sort of correlation with, uh, you know, students who are participating in CTE, or the difference between a participant, someone who may take one class, and a concentrator, someone who is sort of in that pathway maybe for that specific topic. So somebody who is focused in doing the sort of agriculture pathway, for example, that while many of those concentrators, 75% or so, continued education beyond high school, with almost 70% going to a four-year college, a very small number, relatively speaking, actually went into jobs that were related to the CTE training program that they selected. So the chart on the right here just gives you an idea within Milwaukee where CTE concentrators, so those students who chose to sort of be in that pathway, were more interested. So the blue line there is Metro Milwaukee, while so the red line is the entire state of Wisconsin. So you'll see that Milwaukee has generally a higher interest in some of the technology and engineering and business and IT, and slightly lower than average in the other categories. Finally, we'll look at neighborhood schools. So noting the sort of declining popularity and enrollment of those neighborhood school programs, this chart on the right is showing you just over a 17-year period, the change in trends for students who are enrolling at their quote unquote assigned school, which is often that sort of neighborhood school, and this is at a national level. You can see that that number is beginning to drop. So oftentimes when we think about school choice, people are primarily focused on students who are leaving a district to go to a charter school or a private school or even homeschool options. But school choice, as is very present in Milwaukee. Public schools does not always mean leaving the district. It can be finding a choice option within the district. So knowing that that is a strong sort of trend in Milwaukee public schools, you can see how that reflects nationally, where assigned public school enrollment is dropping. Chosen public school, which would be those choice programs within a district, grew pretty significantly over that time period from 14% to 19%, even while those sort of private schools and homeschools remained around the same. But it's worth noting that, sort of zooming out, at the end of the year where this study was finished, 13% of students were going to choice schools within a district, which was more than double the number of students who were attending charter schools overall. So really highlighting, sort of that interest in school choice, even while, staying within a district and supporting that district. So trends that I'm sure you all can relate to in Milwaukee that um, do exist on that national scale as well.